For 3 decades, the United States government has been engaged in a conflict that appears on no military map. It is a war fought without bullets, treaties, or mercy. The enemy holds 346 million acres of American soil. They are heavily armored, fearless, and number in the trillions. And to stop them, scientists were forced to unleash a weapon so grotesque it sounds like the invention of a madman. This is the story of America's strangest battle, a biological arms race involving decapitation, mind control, and an enemy that simply refuses to die. 1930, the port of Mobile, Alabama. Amidst crates of produce arriving from South America, a silent passenger disembarks. They are Solenopsis invicta, the red imported fire ant. In their native Brazil, these ants are kept in check by a brutal ecosystem of predators. But in America, they found paradise. No natural enemies, endless food, a climate that mirrored home. They are engineering marvels. When floods come, they don't drown. They link their bodies together, forming unsinkable living rafts that can float for weeks. When they attack, they don't bite individually. They swarm, emitting pheromones that coordinate hundreds of simultaneous stings. For American ranchers, they became a nightmare. Newborn livestock, unable to stand, blinded and killed by insects smaller than a grain of rice. By the 1990s, the invasion was total. The ants had built an underground empire where every 2 acres concealed 60 heavily defended fortresses. The government's initial response was brute force, chemicals, fire, flooding. But Solenopsis invicta is hydra-headed. Poison a mound, and the colony splits, the queens relocating deep underground. Kill 1,000, and 10,000 take their place. Conventional warfare had failed. If the United States wanted to reclaim the South, they couldn't use poison. They needed an assassin. Entomologists turned their eyes back to the source, the rainforests of South America. They were looking for the one thing the fire ant fears. Enter the phorid fly, the executioner. The phorid fly is not a predator in the traditional sense. It is a parasitoid. Its method of killing is precise, biological horror. The female fly strikes from the air, injecting a single egg into the ant's thorax. The ant survives the attack. It returns to the colony. It continues to work, forage, and defend the queen. It has no idea that it is already dead. Inside, the larva hatches. It migrates through the ant's body, feeding on hemolymph, eventually pushing its way into the head capsule. There, it consumes the brain and the mandibular muscles. The final stage is decapitation. The larva releases an enzyme that dissolves the connective tissue of the neck. The head falls off. The pupa pupates inside the severed skull, emerging weeks later to hunt again. In Gainesville, Florida, the USDA converted a laboratory into a weapons factory. The goal? Operation Ant Attack. Scientists engineered attack chambers where alarm pheromones, the chemical scent of panic, were pumped in to drive the flies into a feeding frenzy. Production ramped up from 1,500 flies a day to millions. Packed in temperature-controlled tubes, these biological missiles were shipped to the front lines. The strategy was sophisticated. Trojan horse ants, already infected in the lab, were released back into wild mounds to spread the parasite from within. When the flies were deployed, the effect was immediate, but the scientists noticed something unexpected. It wasn't just the death count that mattered, it was the fear. Fire ants are genetically hardwired to recognize the sound of a phorid fly. When the flies are present, the colony goes into lockdown. Foraging stops, expansion halts, the ferocious aggressors become timid, cowering in their tunnels. The flies established themselves in the wild, suppressing ant populations by up to 15%. Native species began to return. Nature, it seemed, was healing. But nature is rarely so simple. After decades of bio-warfare, aerial poison drops, and canine detection units, a hard truth began to emerge in the data. The fire ants adapted. They shifted their foraging schedules to times when the flies were inactive. They learned to minimize exposure, and, most importantly, they outbred the casualties. For every ant decapitated by a fly, the colony simply produced 10 more. The reproductive engine of the colony was faster than the biological weapon designed to destroy it. The result is not a victory, but a stalemate. The flies and the ants are now locked in a permanent, self-sustaining loop of violence across the American South. We attempted to weaponize evolution, but the fire ant proved a fundamental law of biology. Survival belongs to those who refuse to quit. The war is not over. It has simply become part of the landscape.